In today's world, people feel lost in a sea of ideas. Which ones should we accept? Stay tuned because you're listening to Veracity Hill, striving for truth on faith, politics, and society. Here is your host, Kurt Jarris.
Well, a good day to you, and thanks for joining us here on another episode of Veracity Hill, where we are striving for truth on faith, politics, and society. So nice to be with you here. Baseball season is underway, and the Chicago Cubs are presently atop the NL Central. I guess so. They were off yesterday. They're undefeated. All right, they're 1-0. They got a game going today. Very excited. Hopefully, another World Series victory is at hand. And maybe you can hear the car alarm going off on Main Street here in downtown West Chicago. The Defenders media offices are home to the best international podcast that comes out of West Chicago, International Apologetics Podcast. Chris, how does that go again?
Best International Apologetics Podcast being broadcast from West Chicago.
Something like that. Yes, that's right. For those of you who think our claims are a bit exaggerated, let me tell you this. We happen to be the only podcast that fits that description that comes out of West Chicago, Illinois. And so it's great to be coming to you here today. We have a fascinating show coming up for you. But yet, if you haven't had a chance to listen to last week's program, I want to see if I can push you in that direction. Be sure to listen to that very fine interview with Paul Gould on cultural apologetics, a sort of holistic approach to presenting a winsome case. Apologetics isn't just about presenting arguments. There's also an art form to it that we have to understand where people are at, and that also, as we reach people, we're doing so with our lifestyles, and that includes everything that we do and who we are, including the work that we do, the art that we make. And so being a winsome, appealing Christian is a part of a lifestyle, not just trying to argue people over and drag them in to the kingdom, which for some people that works. C.S. Lewis said that he came kicking and screaming into the faith, but for many others, that's not the case. It's about being winsome, a sweet aroma, as I like to say, and that aroma that comes from Acts, I believe 10 or 15. Cornelius offered his sacrifices were a pleasing aroma to God. It says so. We need to have that sweet aroma ourselves. Jesus talks about being salt for people. Okay, at any rate. Fascinating show coming up here. We are talking about the natalism and anti-natalism debate. And joining us is one of our recurring guests. I'm very pleased to have him on for the first time on video, Nick Byrd. Nick, how are you doing today?
Doing well, man. How are you?
Good. I know before we've had you in the earlier stages of our programming, we had you via just audio. And in fact, I recall, I think, was it the first time or the second time you were on a road trip, and so you talked on your phone?
Oh, man. Yeah, we were supposed to finish a hike by a certain time.
Yeah.
I was told, and we didn't finish that hike, so I was coming down from the mountain. Yeah.
Well, thanks for doing that now, and it's great to see you person to person. And for those of you who like and follow Nick Byrd on Facebook, he frequently jokes about his uncanny appearance to the celebrity Neil Patrick Harris. So if you think Neil Patrick Harris is on our program today, you're wrong. And in fact, I would rather have a conversation with Nick Byrd than Neil Patrick Harris, I think. Although he would be an interesting interviewee,
oh, yeah.
I'm sure. He probably doesn't get into the type of issues I'm interested in, though. And so let's see if I can remember. We had you on to talk about third-party voting. That was the very first time you were on the show. And the second time was on rationality, faith and rationality. Something like studies show atheists tend to be more rational, and we explored what that meant and exceptions and nuances and all that to what the research was really indicating. But what got my attention was you shared on your page something about this topic, natalism. Am I saying that correctly? Natalism? That's
how I would say it.
Yeah.
I don't know how it's said.
All right, natalism. And so I thought this was fascinating because also in the news recently, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has been talking about how it's a legitimate question whether people should have children because of the effects of climate change. And that comes out of an interview she did, and then also in a live stream here. And before we jump into it, I want to play this video for our audience, so you can hear for yourself a question that, believe it or not, some people are asking, and people in power and in influence are proposing this, and people listen. People listen to people as authorities on these subjects. So I want to play for you here at least about a minute here of what AOC claims here. So Chris, are we ready here? All right, here we go.
Our planet is going to face disaster if we don't turn this ship around. And so it's basically like there's scientific consensus that the lives of children are going to be very difficult. And it does lead, I think, young people to have a legitimate question. You know, is it okay to still have children? And I mean, not just financially, because people are graduating with $20, $30, $100,000 worth of student loan debt, and so they can't even afford to have kids in a house, but also just this basic moral question, like, what do we do? And even if you don't have kids, there are still children here in the world, and we have a moral obligation to them, to leave a better world for them. And this idea that if we just, you know, I've been working on this for X amount of years, it's like not good enough. Like, we need a universal sense of urgency, and people are trying to like introduce watered down proposals that are frankly going to kill us.
All right, we'll pause there. So you can see here, she is genuinely concerned about people bringing other people into the world and the suffering that people might have as a result of climate change. And she also talked about financial burdens and difficulties, which, of course, many of these are tough realities for people that they're facing. And some people might think that she's just, you know, this crazy person. But Nick, as you and I know, there are people that give serious thought and consideration to this position. And so, while That's for right. many people, AOC might just be a laughing board or something, there is serious thought here. So, as we jump into this discussion, let's first start off by maybe defining our terms. What is natalism and what is antinatalism?
So I guess natalism would be the idea that some good comes of procreating, or at the very least, like, we're permitted to procreate. But I would imagine it's probably even stronger than that, right? So antinatalism would just be the denial of that claim. Something like it's bad to procreate, or like there's a comparative claim that goes something like not procreating is better than procreating. And then there's all sorts of claims about, like, you know, existence versus non-existence. It's better to not exist than to exist is some people's reason to be antinatalist. Yeah. And I can't help but think here, you know, sometimes our shows are dealing with political issues proper, and others, a lot of them are theology and apologetics. Sometimes, well, and broadly speaking, those areas cross paths, right? With at least from my hosting seat here, everything comes from a Christian worldview, you know, how we look at things, including the political realm. But sometimes those issues are just more obviously melding, and this happens to be one of those topics where we want to consider human life. We want to consider even what the Bible says about human life, and many people think that, well, obviously the Bible talks about the value of human life and procreating, but there are also, and we'll get into this later, there are also some verses which present sort of an antinatalist view in some cases, maybe. So we'll look into that. So that's fascinating. So we definitely see sort of political and theological, biblical ideas here crossing paths. So Nick, all right, let me ask you, what got you interested in this debate? Yeah, so I was taking a grad seminar at University of Colorado, and one of the topics we covered in applied ethics, the seminar, was this problem called the non-identity problem. So the non-identity problem involves this question about, like, whether people who don't exist or things that don't exist can be harmed, right? So one example that I hear a lot is, like, imagine that I ask you or my family or something in my will and testament to cremate me after my death and to, you know, spread my ashes on the top of a mountain. But instead,
you or my family, flush my ashes down the toilet, or they don't cremate me at all, or something like that. Am I harmed by this? And there's this question of like, well, how could I be harmed if I don't exist? Like, who's being harmed in this scenario? And so if you have the intuition that people who don't exist can't be harmed, then that's going to maybe inform what you think about related topics about like natalism and antinatalism. We might find out how that happens later. But I'm curious, actually, what do you think about this? Like, can people who don't exist be harmed or not?
Yes. Well, and I'm sure we're going to get more into that. But yeah, I would say actually that they can, that their value, their legacy can be harmed as a result. And I'm sure philosophers have also argued that. I read one book my senior year at Biola University, Nicholas Wolterstorff, Justice, Rights and Wrongs. And so very much influenced by him. And he argues, I think, this about human rights, that when people die, they still have rights, that their will and testament be honored, and that legacy is a part of that, that they're remembered the right way, that there's value there. And not that there's value merely in human circles as we understand things, but because our rights, Wolterstorff argues, our rights come from God, and God has given us value. And so, yeah, when you have a will and testament, an individual still can be harmed, their honor. So yeah, that's kind of my approach. But I'm interested to learn more about what antinatalists would say here. So who has been one of the big proponents that you are familiar with on the antinatalism front?
Yeah, so the one I hear a lot about is David Benatar. So he's a South African philosopher. He's got a book, I think it was 2006, something called Better to Never Have Been. And I think he has even a follow-up paper where he's like responding to the critics of the book, saying like it's still, and the paper title is still better to never have been. And I think he also has a recent book called The Human Predicament, which is about how, among other things, how bad human life is.
Yeah.
And so he's got a very I guess pessimistic view of human existence, and so that I think seems to be motivating this idea that procreating is bad.
I'm not even sure that pessimistic is a fair term. I mean, if he's arguing that it's better not to have been born, he has a very depressing view of human existence, and I can't help but think, and I'm sure he's got good, robust reasons for this, very thoughtful person. But I mean, if he thinks it's better to have never been born, but yet he's alive and he's writing, he's finding value in writing and sharing ideas, isn't that a little at least inconsistent? I mean, that's sort of my first go-to thought.
Yeah. So this is actually a response I run into sometimes where people will say, an honest or consistent antinatalist would essentially stop living. And since they're not really stopping living, then they must not really be antinatalists, in some sense, right?
Yeah.
And so Benatar has some responses to thoughts like this that go like, look, no, life can have some meaning, but it's not some sort of cosmic meaning that really justifies coming into existence. And so he considers ceasing to exist a reasonable option, but not, the only option that anyone should ever consider.
So he's not prescribing it, we'll say.
Yeah, I wonder if his publishers would let him prescribe that, but I don't think he is.
Yeah. Okay. So at least my first inclination in how to respond to him, that's something that his responders have also brought up in the literature, that there's a serious concern here about consistency. Okay. So that's good. But what are some of those reasons that he has for saying it's better to have never been born?
Right. So one of the kind of more well-known reasons that he has for antinatalism comes down to this comparison he makes between existence and non-existence. So the idea is you could like build a table, and on the left side you have existence, and on this table you'll have things like pains and pleasures. And pleasures, those are good. Pains are bad. So you've got pleasures and pain, you've got some good, you've got some bad. And on the other side of the table, you've got non-existence. and you've got like the absence of pleasure and the absence of pain. And it seems like the absence of pain is probably good, but the absence of pleasure is not bad. But basically, however you fill in this table, it just looks like there's more good on the non-existent side than there is on the existent side of this table. And so, he says, it's better to not exist than to exist.
That's interesting in terms of weighing pain and pleasure against each other, and that for him, the better to not have pain outweighs better than the pleasure. I think he's probably mistaken there, and people might not realize the great things that can bring life joy. I think joy is a deeper, more soulful experience than simply pleasure seeking. I mean, does he mean pleasure in sort of like a hedonistic sense, or does by pleasure he mean even those deep things like a father? Well, I mean, this kind of begs a question, but I take sort of a pleasure out of having children, and I'm referring to the act of fathering my young ones. So sort of experience. Let's take one that's not begging the question. How about going to a baseball game?
Sure. I'm not familiar with, so there's different types of, hedonism or utilitarianism or consequentialism. And like some people distinguish between like higher pleasures and lower pleasures. Like I think John Stuart Mill does this. So if Benatar does something like that, then he might say, yeah, look, we can distinguish between higher pleasures and lower pleasures. But I think he's still going to say, like, no matter how nuanced you get about pain and pleasure, it's still going to come out that, non-existence just turns out to have more good stuff in it or less bad stuff in it than existence when you build that table and compare the two.
Yeah. So this is how he gets to his conclusion that it's better to not experience pain over experiencing pleasure. Would that be a fair assessment?
That's right. So he assigns, different values to existence and non-existence, and the value of non-existence turns out to be like higher or better, more good, something like that.
Yeah, right. Okay, and so what do philosophers think of his view?
Well, there's definitely some responses. Like I said, he has a paper responding to those views, and we considered some in this grad seminar that I mentioned earlier. The thing that I find most troubling is just this very comparison, right? So, imagine we're building this table, comparing existence with non-existence like he does. I'm following him mostly when we're filling in the values for existence, right? So like pleasure, yeah, I guess that's good. Maybe there's pleasures that are better than other pleasures, fine. Pain seems bad, so I'm with him there. And then when we get to this non-existence column, I have no intuitions. Like I don't know what to do with it. I don't know how to assign any value to non-existence because there's nothing there to have value.
The people that haven't existed can't tell us what value there is there.
Right. So when it comes time to compare the two columns, I'm just drawing a blank, right? It's kind of like when you divide by 0 on a calculator, right? You get this error, right? So I feel like when you compare these two columns, you don't get a response like one is greater than the other. You just get like error, or like something here is undefined.
I was gonna say undefined is what the calculator would say,
right?
If I remember math class back in high school.
Right.
Yeah, that's funny. I see Tony here who's following along. Thank you, Tony. Great to have you with us today. He mentions a Bible verse. We're gonna get to that later in the program, so don't be getting ahead of ourselves here. Okay, so Benatar thinks that in having children, we are doing a harm to these children. Is that right?
Yeah. So he'll use phrases like coming into existence is harmful, or bringing someone into existence harms the person being brought into existence. There's disagreement. Well, yeah, I guess I was going to say there's some disagreement about what coming into existence could mean. That's kind of a strange phrase.
Yeah. Okay. Now here's a thought.
So theodicy is the attempt to reconcile divine providence with the evil and suffering we see in the world. And one of the earliest church fathers in historical theology to attempt a theodicy was Irenaeus, and he brings in what is now commonly called the soul-making theodicy, that evil and suffering exists because God is helping build our character. Now, I don't know if Benatar is a theist, deist, or whatever. I mean, he might hold, but it seems like even on, say, an atheistic view, you might think that some pain is actually beneficial. So, for example, when you stick a needle in your arm in order to be vaccinated against a greater pain that could result, that small pain, while still painful, is actually a good. In the grand sense of in the big picture, does Benatar evaluate those types of pains, and does he put them as a pleasure somehow, as like a good? What's his view on that?
To be honest, I'm not sure I know his view on that, but that's definitely the type of question that you run into when you take a kind of consequentialist and or hedonistic consequentialism towards these issues is how do we think about pain? Because it's, like you're saying, some people are going to have the intuition that some pains are at least indirectly good. And they, some people might even say like some kinds of pain could be directly good because some people seem to derive pleasures from pains, right? So like masochism.
Yeah.
So these are thorny questions that are gonna need to be answered at some point to get the view off the ground, I think.
Yeah, I know. Again, one of our viewers here, Tony, he's a big weightlifting guy, and so like lifting weights is a great example, right? There's pain in there, but the end result is that, and sometimes you walk away feeling good. I mean, it's an odd feeling having suffered. Putting your body through that suffering. And people that run marathons, I mean, same thing. It's, a long suffering, 26 miles, 26.2. What is exactly the distance?
That's right.
I think 26.2. That's something that people suffer through, especially non-trained runners, like my friend Cisco Cotto. I know did the Chicago Marathon last year. He told me he was suffering through it.
C.S. Lewis has a line about this, I think, where he says something like, after a long day and you get into bed and you feel like aches from what you did earlier in the day, and those aches are technically pain, but there's something that also feels good about that pain, right?
Yeah.
So it's a similar idea, I think.
Yeah. All right. So if you had to sort of cast or play your hand here, do you think that existence is better than non-existence?
I guess I would reject the comparison, right? So it just seems to be, to me, an impossible comparison, sort of like dividing by zero is an impossible calculation. And if you can't make the comparison, then I think that essentially that reason for antinatalism seems to fall apart.
I see. Okay, so you sort of reject his reasoning. Maybe there are some other reasons to be an antinatalist, but the weighing value here you kind of reject.
That's right. So if antinatalism can be, salvaged, I don't think it'll be salvaged by comparing existence to non-existence. It'll be like comparing some type of existence with like some other type of existence, or at least some other type of definable value.
Right. So you might say, like maybe it depends if it's better to be born or not. Like if you're born into, an American family versus, an impoverished family somewhere often, there are some unreached groups still in, civilization has never even gone into some groups in the Amazon still, I think, or maybe in the South Pacific, natives that haven't seen or any other people for centuries. So
there is some data showing that at least for parents, the satisfaction that comes from having kids does depend a lot on like your income and your like what kind if you're coming from like a developed country type thing. And so there definitely seems to be some contingencies about what good there is in procreating.
Yeah, and we can think of scenarios where humans are under intense suffering. Imagine
Jewish people born, in the 1920s in Germany or Eastern Europe? Is it good for them to have been born or not? Some might think it's better for them to have not been born. But then in response, you might also think, actually, while there was great evil and suffering that they experienced, it has also benefited the human race to recognize these great evils so as to prevent them in the future. This kind of gets into the idea, would you kill baby Hitler?
That's an interesting question.
Yeah, it's another topic, but it's related because some people argue that if you killed baby Hitler, well, maybe something greater than that would come about. So that's why you wouldn't. Which is also fascinating too. Let me say this: a lot of people don't realize a lot more people died under Stalin in Russia than people did in Nazi Germany. But I think for whatever reason, Americans, probably because of our involvement in World War II, just go straight more towards Godwin's law. Are you familiar with Godwin's law?
No.
So Godwin's law is the first person to mention Nazism in an internet debate loses. Well,
okay.
You're not familiar. Well, all the better for you, Nick, because you don't.
I guess you lose.
That's right. Well, but it's just
internet.
Yeah, it's just internet debates. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I got you.
You're well off for not getting involved in some of those debates.
I probably am that guy sometimes, so now it's good to know that, like, the rules of the game.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they're just made up rules, I guess. But certainly some people do bring it up, perhaps preemptively. Yeah. All right. So maybe there are other reasons for thinking, holding to the anti-natalist view. But what might be some reasons, and what do you think about, say, procreating? And I'm not talking about, like, the act itself here, Nick.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I suppose that's a separate topic.
Yep.
So, I'm kind of open to the idea of some type of antinatalism. So I don't think I would be open to the claim, like some like strict or hard antinatalism that says, like, procreation is always and everywhere necessarily bad. But it does seem like we were kind of just getting at that there could be cases in which procreating seems like the wrong thing to do, or even a mistake. And so, some cases that I think of are, for instance, if someone has the option to procreate or, obtain children in some other, legal and good way, like adoption, or for instance, it seems like maybe adoption turns out to be a better option in some cases than procreating. And insofar as, where we happen to be saying in that case, procreating is not as good as another option, then I guess I, am open to the idea of some form of antinatalism.
Interesting. I want to explore that thought a little more, and I can think of a wonderful example here that might support your case, which I'll talk about after the break here. Octomom. Maybe people familiar with the news remember Octomom, and I've piqued your interest, and now I'm going to make you wait here through the break here.
Okay.
All right, so we got to go to break here, and when we come back, we're going to continue our discussion talking about the natalism, anti-natalism debate with our friend of our program, Nick Byrd, who is a PhD candidate at the Department of Philosophy at Florida State University and a fellow in the Department of Psychology. So he melds those two together, and I'm sure we'll get a refresher on some of his research. But stick with us through the short break from our sponsors.
You're listening to Veracity Hill, striving for truth on faith, politics, and society.
Evangelical Christians are talking about hell. What if we believe what we believe because we've always believed it? What if the gospel is really a matter of life and death? We want you to open your mind, open your Bible, and rethink hell. At rethinkinghell.com, evangelicals look at what the Bible says about hell, putting conventional and controversial views to the test.
Let's say there's this Christian apologist. You love their message, but have trouble finding their videos, their articles, or social media posts. how do you stay connected to them? We're on it. Defenders Media uses the tools of the digital age to create content for your favorite apologists. We give them more screen time, more digital soapboxes, and more presence to deliver more of the content that you love. That's what we do.
I know that social media is important to those of you who follow my work. Many respond to my videos and posts on Facebook and Twitter, but it becomes impossible after a while to keep up with it all and to continue with research. That's why I'm thrilled that we have found a solution, Defenders Media.
Whether it's a website, whether it's printed material, whether it's a question on graphics, I cannot do what I do and reach my audience without the help of Defenders Media. They have been integral in helping me to reach my audience.
Defenders Media ensures consistent content reaches your hand from today's leading apologists and apologetic ministries, like Mike Lycona, Apologetics 315, the Veracity Hill Podcast with Kurt Jarris, and more.
To learn more, text the word Defenders to 555-888, and we'll send you a free PDF of the top 5 ways to share the gospel online. Thanks for sticking with us through that short break from our sponsors. If you'd like to learn how you can become a sponsor or one of our patron, those are folks that just chip in a few bucks a month to help our program go and grow, you can go to our website, veracityhill.com, and click on that patron tab. And that patron tab has been there a long time. I'm hopefully going to be redoing the website in the next few months here, giving it a fresh new look. It's 2019 after all, as the chronological snobbery argument goes. Just because we're in the future, something's now wrong or outdated. But no, there's something to an aesthetic, keeping up with the Joneses, appearances, all that stuff. I haven't updated the site, I should say, given it a new look or kept it fresh since I created it. So it's been almost 3 years now. It'll be 3 years in July that we've been going at this. What a great opportunity we have to do this program week after week. If you love our program, please let us know. If you hate our program, please let us know. Give us reviews on iTunes or the Google Play Store and our Facebook page. Obviously, we live stream week after week, so Facebook is a big platform for us. We've also been busy editing the earliest episodes of Veracity Hill, and they are awful from a technological standpoint. But we're doing this because we're going to upload all of our episodes to YouTube finally. Speaking of keeping up with the Joneses, man, we're like 10 years behind on that one. So we're going to upload all of our episodes to YouTube so that we can live stream simulcast to both platforms. So that's part of our plan. This year, we're getting it done. We're probably going to be getting it done before the summer begins, I think. So yes, that's been part of our plan. We're building for the future. Building for the future, you say, Kurt. Yes, we're talking about natalism and anti-natalism and whether it's good to build for the future. I can see Nick there on my screen. He he likes the shameless transition.
That was excellent.
Thank you, thanks. So I'm joined today by Nick Byrd, a friend of our program. The third time he's been on. Always a great pleasure to have you on, Nick. You've done rapid questions before, so we'll pass on those. But give us a refresher on some of the things you're researching these days.
Yeah, so I kind of do philosophy, but I also do psychology, and I kind of do the philosophy of psychology and the psychology of philosophy, right? So I teach people how to reason philosophically and about history of philosophy, but then I also kind of study how people reason about philosophy. We talked a little bit about that, I think, in the last podcast. Yes,
that's right. Yeah, and if you want to come on and talk even more about that, that is a subject that fascinates me, especially as, psychology, that's so interesting because, and correct me if I'm wrong, okay, because psychology is not my field, but there tends to be an approach to psychology which is, again, I could be saying something very ignorant, very deterministic, that the synapses in our brain bring about responses to us, and so we're sort of determined to do things, determined to think things as a result of the chemical processes. Is that a fair assessment of, even just in general, psychology?
It's interesting. I think that in science in general, there is this determinist intuition. What follows from that obviously probably varies. So I think some people just aren't that worried about it. And then other people might think, yeah, some troubling things follow from determinism, like, maybe claims about free will or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But at the same time, there's the concept of neuroplasticity, right? Where it's as if we make different decisions, we train our brain to respond differently. So there's sort of a give and take. So at any rate, so my understanding of psychology is that things are just very deterministic. I'm one of those outworkings or conclusions you say is that what if my belief in God is just determined by the chemical responses? Am I being irrational, or am I just doing what I was determined to do? Do I have objectivity? So a lot of these questions come up, which I'm grateful for your pursuit of truth. Some of the things you study and you're interested in are trying to find that objectivity, if it even can be had, I'm sure is something you come across, both in philosophy and psychology.
Can I ask you about your research?
Yeah. So my research, so I'm studying historical theology, which is basically like looking at what other guys think about God and the Bible. And I'm studying a specific doctrine called original sin, which is it's a theological approach. I might say it's theological anthropology. So what does the Bible tell us about human nature and the fall of Adam and Eve and the consequences of that? So I'm looking at the thought of a few monks from southern France in the 5th century. They are the so-called semi-Pelagians, and they usually get a bad rap, a bad view in the circles I run in. So I'm actually trying to salvage their legacy, if you will, and the value that they have. So that's sort of my research, and I'm working on finishing that up. So it's it takes time, as you know. We've both, from the sounds of it, we've both been in our PhD programs for a few years. So that's kind of what I'm working on, and I'm looking forward to being done. And then once I can get that published, then I'll probably be doing a lot more talking and writing. And I'd like to get into debates too with some other folks in theology debates on the topic. So that should be very fun. Yep.
I look forward to that stuff.
Yeah, good. Cool. I'm glad it interests you a little bit. Not until I'm talking, then you'll lose interest. So,
well, we'll see. There's a way to test that hypothesis.
Yes. Okay. So before we took our break, you were talking about how you were perhaps quite a bit or open to the idea of antinatalism, and that we could think of examples where it's better to adopt than to procreate. And I teased you, didn't I? Now I have to look her up, what her name was. She made the news years ago, and I called her Octomom. Octomom, here she is. Nadia Denise Dude Suleiman, known as Octomom, I'm reading from the great Wikipedia, by the way, is an American media personality who came to international attention when she gave birth to octuplets in January 2009. So they're the second full set of octuplets that were born in the United States, something like that, maybe ever. I think why she... Yes, here's why she made news, because she divorced her husband in 2000. Let's see. She divorced her husband in 2008. So she was a single mom, and I think she had these kids. I was right. Via IVF. So she So she conceived of these octuplets through IVF, and then had to go on and receive taxpayer support. Because, single mom, 8 kids. I mean, it's hard not being a single mom, 1 kid. And again, maybe that's a reason for not procreating, is maybe your life circumstance. So there's certain contexts under which it's certainly there are contexts under which it's better to procreate. And so I could think of this example where, why, single mom, 8 IVF, 8 kids. Why? Better not to have done that in the context. But then
I wonder if the 8 was intentional, though. I wonder if the goal was like 1.
1 or 2.
I don't know how it works.
Yeah, with IVF, I think they kind of just they throw
1,000 darts
Yeah.
and see what hits, and sometimes you get, it's kind of common for IVF for folks to have twins or triplets.
Okay.
From this, of course, sometimes it's common for it to not work at all, so that's why it's very
Right.
much hit or miss. Okay, so you're open to the idea. Now, when you say you're open to the idea of antinatalism, do you draw a context to that, or do you think it's sort of a general universal principle? Because, like I said, I think there are examples where, in a certain context, it would be better not to procreate. But I certainly think in other contexts, it's highly encouraged to procreate. So I sort of say maybe the objective values I think that exist apply in contexts differently versus a universal rule. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, so I think whatever my view is about antinatalism, it's coming from somewhere else, like it's derived from something else. And so it gives a kind of contingent view or a contextual view, I think is maybe what you were driving at. So it would be something like this. Look, there's going to be certain situations in which procreating is not the best option. And, the better option might be maybe not having kids at all or adopting someone who already exists, right? So, one idea is like, look, there's a scarcity of resources. There's already people in the world who don't have much. Bringing a new person into the world kind of creates like an additional competitor for those resources, right? So it would be better to just take the person who doesn't have enough of these resources as it is and, adopt them and, hopefully give them more resources and therefore a better life than it would be to procreate, a new person.
May I press you on that point?
Yeah, good.
Okay, so, but couldn't we say that not just now, but for all of human history, that there's a scarcity of resources?
Oh, sure.
And hasn't it seemed to have been the case that that civilization adapts and that we come based on sort of an economic argument from market forces? We are able to create more of the resources that are required to meet the demand.
Yeah, sure. So, economics has probably shown that like not all exchanges or, resource situations are zero sum games, but there can be positive sum games, right? So
yes,
it might be the case that we can both bring a person into the world and like still have enough resources for this new person and all of their competitors.
Yeah.
It does seem though that not every procreation is necessarily going to be accommodated by a positive sum outcome, right? So
totally.
It seems like it's an empirical question, right? So like, for every given case of potential procreation, we would want to ask this question, like, is this going to be one of those positive sum cases or is this going to be a non-positive sum case?
Right. And I think that approach is certainly compatible with my contextualize approach. So yeah, I'd agree there. Yeah, but I think as a universal rule, because sometimes what is communicated is an unnuanced approach. So, like with AOC's video, I mean, she isn't just saying there are contexts. She's sort of drawing this as a universal rule. At least that's how I perceive it. That she's saying because of climate change and other issues, people should. She says it's a legitimate question whether people should have children. So she's sort of drawing this universal rule, or at least she's applying this argument to contexts under which I think it is highly encouraged to have children. So that's where I'm going to say, hey, wait a second here. Let's consider this. Whereas your approach is, the economic argument about resources is compatible with my contextualized approach, even if we might disagree on which contexts apply.
Right.
Yeah, okay. All right, so I'm curious, where can people find out more about some of your research and thinking on this topic?
Yeah, so I have a blog post that basically kind of reviews David Benatar's, existence versus non-existence comparison and how he gets from there to antinatalism. And I kind of complain about my problems with that comparison in that blog post. But probably more importantly, I point readers to kind of 3 influential papers about this topic, and that's probably where people can find like the real philosophy, not my own blog posts. So yeah, that might be worth checking out. It's birdnick.com. It's one of my recent blog posts.
Yeah. Okay. And so some of those articles are are they? Sorry, not the blog posts, but the 3 articles, academic articles.
That's right.
those are in favor of antinatalism, or are they responses to antinatalism?
That's a good question. I think they're at least responses to the reasons for Benatar's antinatalism. So they might, sort of like me, end up compatible with some kind of antinatalism, even if they reject one particular person's reasons for one particular person's antinatalism.
Yeah. Right. A contextualized approach.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah. If you're coining that term, you got to give me credit now.
Oh, it's yours. I'll cite you from now on.
Awesome.
Jaros 2019, man.
Yes, yeah, that's right. And I actually had submitted an article for publication about a month or so ago, and I wanted to cite a radio show, and I thought better of it because I guess in academic, it's got to be published papers. I guess radio interviews. I see that sometimes, but
we're a little snobby. Academics are about that kind of stuff. Right? It has to be like peer reviewed, and it has to be some prestige attached to whatever the peer reviewed publication was.
Yeah, and even if it's the same person who wrote something, and they did an interview somewhere, you don't where they said something else or in relation, the radio doesn't count. Radio interview doesn't count. Fascinating. Okay, so this stuff is interesting, that there might be reasons for being an antinatalist. And some people might be wondering, how does this approach sort of a Christian worldview? The Bible talks about, one of the first commands. The first command is to be fruitful and multiply in the Bible. And there's certainly lots of passages about the value of life and experiencing life with your children, teaching your children to follow in the ways of the Lord. So I'm curious to get your thoughts a little bit about this. And you sort of brought one verse to my attention, which actually, this is the verse also Tony here, who's watching along today, cited as well from Ecclesiastes. So I'll let you sort of take it over here and give me your thoughts on that, the Bible and antinatalism.
Yeah, so I mean, I probably had an intuition at some point that the Christian view would be basically natalist because it's frequently talking about how we should populate the earth and have kids and all this family oriented stuff. But then I run across these passages like the Ecclesiastes chapter 4 verse 2 and 3. Did you want to talk about that now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So that one just says, I declared that the dead who had already died are happier than the living who are still alive. But better than both is the one who's never been born, who's not seen the evil that is done under the sun, right? So, I mean, when I read this, I think, wow, that is just straight up David Benatar. And the other people who talk like this. Ecclesiastes, you probably know this better than I do, but, that's supposed to be considered to be written by someone who's particularly wise, yeah?
Yeah, at least traditionally attributed to Solomon. It's a part of wisdom literature.
Right.
Now with, wisdom literature and poetry, it's different. I mean, it's not a treatise. It's not a philosophical treatise, even if there is truth to obvious truth, wisdom to be gleaned from it. So maybe what the author here means, he might be saying something hyperbolic, perhaps, about the states of affairs or the degree of which evil, is so awful to experience and suffer from. So maybe that's a plausible reading of Ecclesiastes. But there are other verses as well, aren't there?
Yeah. So, when I'm thinking about, when I was talking earlier about adoption, I think that's something the Bible talks pretty positively about. Like, it even makes the metaphor that, like, the Christian's relationship to God is one of adoption. Like, we Christians have been adopted, so to speak. And then in James, there's this passage that says, this is chapter 1, verse 27. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God and the Father is this, to care for orphans and widows, right? So the idea seems to be maybe there's some pro-natalist ideas in the New Testament, but there's apparently some pro-adoption views in the New Testament as well, and that might make you think maybe both options are on the table, right?
Right. And here I came up with this one, Mark 14:16. Jesus says, "The Son of Man will go just as it is written about him, but woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that man if he had not been born." So Jesus says here, it would have been better for his betrayer to have not been born. now, I'm going to say here that Jesus doesn't mean it literally, that he means it hyperbolically, and here's why. We'll say, Nick, for my own sake, from a conservative evangelical Christian perspective, if Jesus actually thinks that, then Jesus would have never been betrayed. If Jesus was never betrayed, he wouldn't have died via crucifixion, which was all part of God's plan from, here's a Latin term, Historia Salutis, the history of salvation. And this was God's plan all along from my vantage point. So I can't help but think Jesus doesn't mean it literally here, because he means that this is just a great evil that will occur, but yet he had planned to occur for something to have had happened. Boy, a lot of grammatical terms there. To have had happened. I think that's proper English. Chris,
I know what you mean.
Chris is nodding yes. So I don't think Jesus means it literally. So we can't take that. But yeah, you got the orphans and widows case there in James. But even still, caring for the orphans, which is something the early church certainly did. And in fact, they would, the early church, it's documented, would pick up infants on the garbage heaps throughout the Roman Empire and care for them and bring them in and raise them. They would raise these children that were just given up. I forget what the terminology is, but so certainly Christians did do that. But that's compatible with procreation. Certainly Christian couples have been having children for 2,000 years here. So how would you respond there if we've got sort of these responses to these allegedly antinatalist passages?
So are you asking how I would respond to your interpretation of like the Jesus passage and the Ecclesiastes passage?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so I guess the one thing I was thinking is like one response that's often comes up in the theodicies, like you were mentioning earlier, is how, right, God might have plans, but then also there's like, at least according, in some theologies, there's also this role for free will, right? So like God can let things happen. And so it could be that, at least in principle, God could actually think, actually, procreation is wrong in a bunch of different cases. It really would have been better for Judas to never have been born. However, like someone made the free choice to conceive Judas. And like, because I'm okay with free will, I guess, like I let it happen. And so, that interpretation allows Jesus to mean it, so to speak. But I don't know if that works.
Yeah, I think so. And like I said too, I mean, I think there are contexts under which, so I'll go a bit further here, maybe towards your side here in openness. I think there are times in which the Bible prescribes antinatalism.
Yeah.
So wait, you may be like, wait, huh? What? The Bible talks about there are prohibitions against having sexual relations before marriage. So there are contexts under which people do in fact do that. And now, and I'll say this, in America and Western civilization and elsewhere throughout the world, children are born outside of wedlock and they grow up fatherless. This is a huge issue. It's a massive issue. I think in Sweden, I read some crazy statistic like 80% of children born in Sweden are born outside of wedlock, which now I'm going to look up to confirm. Quick search here. Let's see, at least in 2013, 54.4%, which is still high. But I think I've read some article even more recent where it's higher. But still, can you imagine 50% of children born out of wedlock? 50% are essentially fatherless. Maybe there's some relationship with their father that they have, but there isn't that core home life of a mother and a father. So the Bible certainly prescribes contexts under which it's not good to have children. It's not good for the children's sake. And I'm not just saying because God said so. I think there are very good reasons why these contexts are prescribed. There's wisdom here. from human experience. It's not good for a child not to have, say, a father or a mother. I think it's a very natural thing, and that's why the Bible, it's a thing. It's a natural thing. It's a God-designed thing from my vantage point here. And so there are contexts under which the scriptures in Christianity say, hey, you shouldn't be having children at this stage. So I'm in agreement in that sense, that I'm open to situations where that shouldn't be the case. So yeah, I don't know. What do you think about that, Nick?
Yeah, so there's these interesting studies that look at like well-being, subjective well-being, happiness, life satisfaction, relationship satisfaction over time. And one of the things that these studies find is that on average, having a kid means you're going to be less happy, like as a result of having a kid, it seems like. So basically having a kid has like a very small positive effect for a brief moment, and then like your overall happiness and life satisfaction just kind of like steadily goes down for the rest of your life, and then it pops back up a little bit in retirement, like maybe when the kid moves out or something. I don't know.
Empty nesters.
These are just average. These are just averages, right? So it might be that, like you mentioned, like you love having kids, right? So you're like an outlier on this graph.
Sure.
But you know, if you're looking at that, you might think, oh, interesting. Having kids isn't all good. In fact, on average, it's maybe a very negative experience for lots of people. And what's most interesting to me is that the negative effects are worst for relationship satisfaction. So there is not even a positive effect at the beginning for having a kid when it comes to relationship satisfaction.
I'm an outlier.
And then it just, right, again, another outlier, right, because these are averages. And so there might be some people who look at this data and, you know, have some empirical reasons to think, wow, like, I'm not sure I want to have kids, or I'm not sure I want to have kids while I, like, with a particular person. Like, I might want to have a kid while not having a partner or something.
Okay, so this is fascinating. All right, so this is where, I mean, studies show, yes, okay, but we also have to ask ourselves, on what basis, on what expectations are people doing this? If they go in having inaccurate expectations, like they think they're going to be able to retain their free time, you know, after having kids, you know, that's just false expectation. Of course, it's going to set them up for disappointment. Now, do these studies, and that's the thing, where these studies aren't, and some studies do follow people for decades and decades, but they don't maybe go into asking people what their expectations are. You know, what do you think life's going to be like when you have a kid, and why do you want to have children? So those are the sorts of things that I would say, hey, wait a second. Yeah, of course people are going to be disappointed if they go into it for the wrong reasons. So I wouldn't want people to come away thinking, oh, this study shows if you have kids, you're going to be off, you know, you're going to be worse off, which for me, that in my interpretation, which could be inaccurate, that's the way it comes across though. I mean, is that...
Well, when you're looking at the averages, yeah. So it's difficult to look at averages and then apply them to, you know, yourself as an individual, right? Because it's not clear precisely how to do that. But you might think that, like, the averages give you a probability about what to do, right? So if the averages are all leaning one way, then you would think that, in my case, even though I could be an outlier, I'm probably not an outlier or something like that. So,
right.
There's actually a deeper problem looming here. This is an excellent opportunity to mention Lori Paul's work. So she has this work called about transformative experiences. And one of her paradigm cases of a transformative experience is the decision to have children, right? So suppose you've got all the data in the world and you've like talked to all the parents in the world, and you think you have a really good idea of what it's going to be like to have a kid. The process of having a kid transforms your own values to the point where the person you are after having the kid isn't the person you are before you have the kid.
Yeah.
So, you know, the decision that you're making pre-kid doesn't factor in the values you'll have afterwards. And so you just can't, there's like an inability to make that rational choice theory type calculation about having children. And there are other types of transformative experiences, but like having kids is one of them.
Yeah, yeah. But again, hopefully if you can go in managing the expectation that you will change and how you respond to those situations, at least, again, I'm not a psychologist, but that you could go in and choose how you respond to those situations, you can end off better, I would argue. And I think, from my standpoint, I think the Bible talks about what a great experience having children is, the value that's there. of course, there are these exceptions that we should consider, and as you say, be open to, at least what I would say, context under which we shouldn't have kids.
Right.
But again, maybe there are others that are saying, no, even in those circumstances, don't have kids. So like climate change and other reasons. I would push back against some of those reasons. Some people, it's very common, especially in America today, for people are worried that if they have, kids, or even if they get married, they're not going to be able to get out of debt or something like that.
Yeah.
And I would argue that marriage has a way of bringing people out of poverty. I know that's a whole nother debate, but that marriage is a good thing, and especially Ricardo's economic comparative advantage, I think, benefits marriages. Maybe we'll have to do an episode on that. I don't think we have yet, the comparative advantage and what that's about. Nick, we've got to close up shop here today, but thank you for coming on the program. Always a pleasure to have you on. And,
likewise.
Please do stay in touch. Keep me posted on your research and other things you're thinking about. I'm very thankful for folks like yourself who want to approach these things objectively, to look at the nuances involved as well with issues. That's very good towards being a critical thinker, which I think you've gained from your study of philosophy. So very appreciative of that.
Appreciate you, man.
Thanks. Have a good one.
All right, Secret.
All right. Well, that does it for our program today. I'm grateful for the continued support of our patrons and the partnerships that we have with our sponsors. They are Defenders Media, Consult Kevin, The Sky Floor, Rethinking Hell, the Illinois Family Institute, and Fox Restoration. I want to thank our technical producer, Chris, for all the fine work that he does week in, week out. And I want to thank our guest, Nick Byrd. We'll be sure to put a link to his website up. I think Chris already has it on Facebook because he's already on top of that stuff. So we'll be sure to do that at our website for this post as well. Last and certainly not least, though, I want to thank you for listening in and for striving for truth on faith, politics, and society.
You've been listening to Veracity Hill, striving for truth on faith, politics, and society. This is a listener-supported program. For more resources, including past shows, visit veracityhill.com.